Thank you, Chair. It is 2 o'clock, so the meeting is now live.
Okay. Ready? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Spring Schools Forum. Before I ask Mandy to go through the apologies, just to do a couple of welcomes. So, welcome to Jonathan Price and Steve Breeze as two observers, and a big welcome to Kelly Mitchell and Andrew Shaw, who join us as two new members. So welcome Kelly and welcome Andrew. Mandy, could you just go through the apologies and pick up any substitutions, please?
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies from Sarah Bailey, Jenny Westley, who sent a substitute, David Jobins. Apologies from Nikki Cruikshank, who sent a substitute to Jane Hodgkins. And also apologies from Julie Rudge, Richard Lane, Keith Hollins and Karen Dobson.
Okay, thank you, Mandy. Much appreciated.
Just can I go through the people who are in attendance today? Unfortunately, we've got a number of people who've come through listed as head teacher, so I might miss people off. So if you can give me a shout when I've finished going through. I know that we have Les McDowell, Kelly Mitchell, Alan Harding, Kim Prince, Alison Parr, Christy Rogers, Richard Redgate, Wendy Whelan, Andrew Shaw, Davy Jobins, Jane Hodgkins, Anne Tapp, Jonathan Price, Steve Breeze, Steve Barr and Judy Wyman.
Claire Evans.
Right. Claire Evans. Is there anyone else who's down as head teacher? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Kevin Albert.
Vicky Lewis, Endon Hall.
Vicky Lewis. Yes. Anyone else?
Yeah, Kevin Albert.
Smashing.
Jane Rutherford.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mandy. Item 2, declarations of interest. Have you got any declarations of interest? Lovely. Moving on to item 3, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of January. You know my style by now. I'm not going to go paragraph by paragraph through the minutes. We will pick up on the actions. Is there anybody who has any questions around the accuracy of the minutes? I've spotted a typo on page 3. I'm really proud of myself. The word convenience doesn't quite fit, Mandy, so I'm really pleased with myself there. Before we move on to the actions, is there anything in those minutes that people need to talk about or are questioning the accuracy of?
Richard, I've got my hand up.
Yeah, Steve, I need to lower my glasses because the television's on a different range. So yes, Steve.
Right, I promise not to have as many matters arising as I did last time, but the paragraph at the bottom of page 1 that goes over the top of page 2. There are actually 3 things in that same paragraph. It mentions notices of concern, which I know is a separate agenda item, and at the end of that sentence, schools who might find themselves in financial deficit at the end of the financial year, really through their own. So there's a request that when the final outturn figures are available for the financial year just ending, that those schools that are in deficit, that's looked at very closely to find the reasons for it. I mean, I'm sure that happens in any case, but just to try and identify the ones that come into that category that I raised last time of having set a robust budget and then found themselves with unexpected and unanticipated additional expenditure which hasn't, at least to date, been refunded. So that's just a request. I did want to mention one particular pressure point there, which has been brought up, which is the change of census date for the pupil premium going back to October rather than January. And I know Tim was seeing there was originally a suggestion that there might be some financial mitigation from the DFE, and I know Tim's had an answer to that, which is probably the answer we were expecting, but not the one we were hoping for. But I mean, just to highlight that, as far as I believe it, a single child who's appeared as qualifying for pupil premium by January, who wasn't on in October, is a loss of over £1,300, and there's several schools who are well into five figures down because of that change of date, which is clearly, it's clearly nothing that the local authority can do about it, but I just think it should be on record. And then the final point, the sentence that goes over from the bottom of page 1 to page 2, I did actually look to see exactly where that expectation of additional funding, where that had come from. And again, just for the record, it came from the official reply from the DFE to a parliamentary petition on fully funding schools for COVID-19 costs and providing relief for loss of income. And there was a fairly lengthy response from the DFE, and the very final sentence said, schools will continue to be able to access existing support for financial issues, including a wide range of school resource management tools and this is the key to it, and in serious circumstances, additional funding or advances from local authorities for maintained schools or ESFAs for academy trusts. So I managed to source that. I knew I hadn't made it up. And that's it. I've got one more matter arising later on in the minutes, but I'm almost done now. I'll shut up.
Thank you, Steve, for that. That's duly noted. I think there's one other hand up, Tim.
Yeah, it's Judy White.
Hi, Judy.
Thank you, Richard. In fact, Steve's stolen my thunder. I was going to ask about what on my copy of these papers, top of page 2, a response was awaited. I was going to ask whether that response had come, but I think Steve's covered that now.
Okay, thank you, Judy. Okay, so before we, I asked members to approve the minutes, if we could just turn to the page of the actions, just to make sure that we've done those. So item 1 is the membership. Mandy, I think that's been addressed and it will be coming up again in the agenda. The high needs block, Tim, that was for members of the forum to email you their thoughts.
Yeah, I've had no additional emails or information emailed through to me.
Okay, thank you. The education banding tool, I think Leslie sorted out the nominations and everybody knows where they stand in terms of the groups.
Yeah, just to let you know, there's been over 30 representatives across the education sector joining the implementation group.
That's because you're so very popular, Leslie.
Must be. Thank you.
In terms of the constitution, again, that's an agenda item that Tim's going to pick up. And thank you all officers and people who've made a contribution to today's report for providing an executive summary. It certainly helps me and I hope it helps members. So in terms of item 3, can I have, does everybody agree that it is an accurate and fair account of the meeting on the 14th of January? Fabulous, thank you. Item 5, the membership update report. That's over to you, Mandy, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that we've had an election since the last meeting, and Kelly Mitchell and Andrew Shaw, who are both in attendance today, were elected. Because we normally hold elections every 2 years, and they were elected in March, we normally hold them in May. I was hoping that the forum would agree to extend their membership by just a couple of weeks so that they fall into re-election in May 2025 rather than March, so we're not holding one out of sync.
Is that acceptable from members? Anybody with any objections to that sensible suggestion? Okay, that's great, Mandy, thank you.
And just as an update, the nomination forms have gone out to all the head teachers and the governors for the May round of elections. So they're all out at the moment. I think the closing date is next week. Okay.
Mandy, is that you done on the membership update?
Thank yes, thank you.
Any questions from members? Thank you. Nobody has obviously recognised it as a deliberate mistake that I missed out item 4, so I'll go back to item 4. There hasn't been any decisions taken by the chairman on the delegated powers. That's just for the minutes, Mandy. Which now leaves us on to item 6, which is notice of concern and licensed definite arrangements. Melanie?
Yeah, that's standing paper on every forum. We've got no new notices of concern in the last period since the last forum. We continue to work with those schools who have an existing licence deficit or notice of concern. Obviously, we're coming up to the deadline for schools' budgets for 21-22, so we will be working with those schools and schools who end this year in a deficit position. Obviously, Steve, we're fully aware that it's been a really hard year. There's been a large reduction in funding. We will be working with those schools closely to identify what's caused these deficits, both budgetary and in real terms.
Thank you, Melanie. Sorry, Tim.
No, I just wanted to pick up the point, I think, from Steve previously in the minutes, in the sense that we have had a response from the department about the way in which a deficit that is a direct result of COVID costs should be treated, and the response that we've had is that they should be treated in exactly the same way as any other deficit, and in line with the statutory scheme for financing schools. And so, as Melanie's just indicated, they will take a look at those, but the way in which they're treated will have to be treated in exactly the same way.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Are there any questions from members to Melanie? No? Thank you very much, Melanie.
Thank you.
Sorry, Richard, I haven't got a chance to put my hand up. It's Judy here.
Okay, Judy.
So, how much support will the authority give to schools who are finding themselves in deficit and likely to have this negative notice of concern put on their record? It's a question for Tim, really.
Yeah, well, to some extent, I think that's again the point that Mel has just made in terms of we will look at it, but it will be for our colleagues from schools finance there to work with individual schools to recover that deficit. As I say, it's the information that we've received back says that they're to be treated in exactly the same way. In terms of the advancement of funds, again, I would have to look to our finance colleagues around the way in which that will happen, and whether that's a possibility, and that's something we would have to look at. But that's certainly not something that the DFE have kind of fed back to us in the questions. So
sorry, Tim. So if you are aware that a school has put in a business case to save some fundings because they understand where their budget is heading in the wrong way, that will be seen as appropriate action.
Yeah, and that's the way.
We are being inundated with these business cases at the moment, and they're not easy to run on Teams.
Yeah. But I mean, Melanie can comment further, but it's about where schools are taking the appropriate action to recover that deficit over the that 3-year period that's set out within the scheme for financing schools. Melanie, I don't know whether there's anything further to add there.
No, obviously, I mean, we're used to setting up deficit plans. So any school that does go into a deficit position, it's DFE guidance now that it's a 3-year position, a 3-year model that we need to pay that back over. In terms of advancement of funds, that would be a kind of going back to county, that would be a will sort of area. But and from my point of view, this is what we're used to doing, is looking at that deficit and putting in a repayment schedule to pay that back over the 3 years. With the number of schools we are asked to help with, more and more could be in a position of having a notice of concern, and that isn't really. I think we've said at this forum in the past, everybody could be in that situation in the not too distant future. I think we've been aware for years that the position has been getting worse and worse, and like you say, more schools are needing this sort of support and they're needing the intervention. Obviously, with the year we've just had, parental fees have gone down, its costs have gone up in terms of cleaning, in terms of covering staff. So we're fully aware that that's going to be a marked difference this year as well.
Thank you.
And I think, it's just important to say that we will continue to lobby the department around those particular challenges that schools have faced, and those additional costs that they've incurred, or that loss of income, and so we will continue to lobby the DFE, on behalf of schools.
Thank you very much for that, Tim. I know Steve wants to come in, but the schools are having to lose very, very valuable members of staff who they really need at this time.
Exactly, Julie. Steve, you've waited patiently in the wings.
No, I'm always very patient. You should know that by now, Richard. It's just a very specific question. Again, it's something that we have raised before. The notice of concern trigger additional visits from Entrust, which schools are charged for. Is there any way in which that additional cost, when they're already in deficit through no fault of their own, can be mitigated? I don't necessarily expect an answer now, but is that something that could be looked at?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we can take away and have a further look at, Steve, definitely.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions to Melanie before we move on to the next agenda item? No, thank you very much, Melanie.
Thank you.
Okay, item 7, the Schools Forum Constitution. Tim?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Everybody's got that summary in front of them. It was just a question for the chair, really, in terms of the some of those decisions. In the executive summary, it does share the changes, and I just wondered whether we wanted to go through each of those changes and get a view from forum members whether they're happy with each of the changes as we go through them, so that we can then make that judgment. Are you okay with that?
I'm fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lovely. Okay. So as the executive summary says, and I'm not going to go through the report in detail. School Forum Constitution was last updated in July 2019. It was on the works programme for 2021. And therefore, we have made some amendments. The chair and vice chair and myself met, and we've made, following that meeting, we've made some further amendments to it. So the first amendment is to say that Forum will undertake a consideration of apologies at the beginning of meetings. And what we're proposing is an action for not accepting apologies and therefore non-attendance at 3 consecutive meetings, that what we would be saying is that member is no longer a member of Schools Forum, and therefore we would then seek either the nomination from the group by who nominates them, or we would then go out to an election if it was a schools member. Again, I don't know, Chair, whether we just want to take people's views around that one.
Can I just ask the question, Tim, then? Does that mean that the clock restarts from today or from the next meeting?
So if we approve these, the constitution today, then the clock would start ticking after this meeting because it's the new constitution.
Right.
So it would start from the July meeting.
Okay. So in terms of what Tim has just said, have we got any questions from the floor, from members that want any more clarity on what Tim has just said? Okay, thank you, Tim.
Okay, and then the next amendment, and again following discussions, what we're proposing to do is to change the timing of the election of the chair and vice chair. And what we're saying is the election of the chair and vice chair will take place in the summer or the last meeting of the school academic year. So that the chair and vice chair elections would take place at that meeting, but those officers wouldn't take their place until the first meeting in the autumn term. And so that what we have is that opportunity of a smooth transition from one chair to the next chair, if there's a change, and similarly the vice chair. And we're also suggesting that to provide some continuity, that what we would do is have that election for 2 years for the chair and vice chair, so long as they meet all of the criterion for being a member of Schools Forum. So that's the proposal. And so again, just picking up on your point, Richard, that would take place in July. So if Schools Forum are in agreement to that recommendation and that amendment, we will be electing the chair in the July meeting.
Okay, so as I understand that then, Tim, two items within one. So that the first part is we would change the election of the chair rather than in the autumn meeting. And secondly, the period of office would be extended to 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Any feedback from members? Kevin, I think your hand's up.
Yeah, just a quick question in terms of the amount of time. If you're serving 2 years, am I right in thinking that our term of office on Schools Forum is 2 years now? In which case, are you going to be facing an election to stay on the Schools Forum at the same time as you're serving as a chair? Because that could cause a problem if you didn't win.
The vast majority of the elections, we're not proposing we change the length of time for a Schools Forum member, Kevin. We're still saying that would be a 4-year term. Because the elections take place in the May, so we know that to some extent that the members will be there for a kind of a 4-year term, or at least a 2-year term if we do it in July, because of the way in which we rotate them. Then we're saying that there wouldn't be we wouldn't be potentially electing a member of Forum for chair who then in the October meeting wouldn't be a member. No, but so right, 4 years.
So basically, then anybody that's in their final year wouldn't be able to stand as chair because they would be facing an election in the middle of their chairmanship, wouldn't they?
The way in which I think we've got it kind of timed. We've got the 2-year period now, so the 2 years is up now.
Right.
And then in 2 years' time, the next 2-year period is up now. So to some extent, we would have that period would be covered.
Right. So everybody's going to be. Sorry, I've obviously misunderstood. So everybody is going to be up for election to the Schools Forum at the same time. So everybody's serving a 4-year period at the same time, or not?
No, it's 2 years.
I'm obviously being dim, aren't I?
No, or I am. We're probably cross purposes here. Mandy can pick that up.
I just didn't want the scenario of a chair being the chair and then losing their seat halfway through being a chair. That was all. If that's not going to happen, that's fine. I'm okay with it. I'll trust you, Tim. You're a mathematician.
There used to be. Okay, so I think there's and what
Les, we've got Les.
Les.
It's just a query because 2 years is quite a commitment. If no one steps forward for 2 years but says I'll do 1 year, what happens then?
Well, that's fine. It's under the same kind of process that the chair is the chair until the chair resigns. So the chair can take that discussion and then say that I'll be resigning my post after that 12 months. Okay. And so, there is no requirement to say that you are going to be in that position of chair or vice chair for the 2 years. I think that is covered in the constitution anyway, Les. That okay. Until you're no longer chair by the 2 year period, or you resign from that post.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you.
Vicky.
Yeah, sorry, just a quick question. Are we assuming then that the chair who is finishing in the July, because there's another chair that's taking over, is expected to continue working with the new chair between July and October for the purposes of the transition, which I think is what we're trying to achieve by having that included?
Yeah, I think, yeah. A bit of expectation in terms of that transition, and also what it does mean is that when we come to the first meeting in the autumn term, that the new chair would undergo all of the pre-work for that meeting, as opposed to a chair that then is no longer chair in the meeting. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Are we okay to assume that then, or do we need to add that in? Do we think?
We can certainly make that further amendment just to make it clear that the expectation.
Probably a small thing, but you could, as long as you've got to have the agreement of the chair that's finishing to just carry out that additional bit, really, haven't you, to make sure that the transition's there.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. Tim, I'm going to continue along your route.
Yeah, everything. I thought there was another hand, but I think it's gone down, hasn't it?
Okay, I'm going to leave the third bullet point there, and we'll come back to that one, because that one is a question that we do want to ask for approval on. So what we're suggesting is that a shortened timescale for the selection, nomination and appointment of schools members that's set out in the appendix. The view was that actually the shorter period of time probably means that it will happen more swiftly, I guess, in terms of from a school's perspective. Steve, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just I have highlighted this to Mandy in an email, but assuming that that's agreed, I think the appendix needs amending to reflect that, because I don't think the appendix has been changed.
Thanks, Steve. We will amend that.
Okay. Yeah. And then the last amendment is the addition of Appendix C, which explains how, when the termly review of the maintained and academy school representation is undertaken. So that seeks to explain when we do it and how we do it. And hopefully everybody's happy with that.
Okay. Any questions on those last 2 points on the floor? No, excellent. Okay, Tim.
Okay, and then the last decision, really, and this is where we're coming to the forum to make a decision, is around the process for electing the chair and the vice chair. And what you see in the paper is a first option, which is that nominations for chair and vice chair are received in advance of the final meeting of the school year. And then those nominations with a pen portrait have to be submitted at least 7 days before we publish the school forum papers. And then what we would do is email all of that information out to school forum members in preparation for the election at that meeting. The other option, which is option B, is for the chair and vice chair, our nominations are received in the July meeting under that agenda item of that meeting and the final meeting in the school year, and then the election would take place as part of that agenda item. So those are the kind of the two options that we have for school forum members' consideration.
Okay, so have we got anybody who would like to speak on behalf of option A and feel strongly that is the way forward? And then I think that obviously then to balance that up, we need somebody who's prepared to speak on behalf of option B to see if that is the way that schools forum want to vote. So in terms of option A, can you see who's got the hands up, Tim? Because unfortunately I can't.
Yeah, so I've got Mandy's hand up as the clerk, and I've also got Jane's hand up.
Okay, Mandy, would you like to go first on option A?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just before you open it up to debate, really, I've had a look at nominations in advance of meetings, and they are legally possible. However, they are quite unusual in local government, and they're not considered to be particular best practice. And I also haven't been able to find any examples where it's done in either a schools forum or other governing bodies. My main concern as clerk is over transparency in the way that nominations are being made. So if I can explain, so currently nominations are proposed and seconded in a public meeting, and there's an opportunity for members to propose an alternative if they don't agree with the first nomination. With option A, members wouldn't know what nominations had been received until they're published, and then it would be too late to nominate anyone else. So my main concern is transparency. However, if the forum is minded to agree option A, could I just suggest that the wording slightly changed so that nominations must be proposed and seconded. Obviously, with a formal election process, you have to be nominated and seconded in a meeting. So proposed and seconded, and must include the pen portrait in advance, and also 7 clear days before a meeting, so that we don't later get into an argument about, well, do we class the day of the meeting as the 7th day, and that sort of debate. I can just see that it could become quite bureaucratic and time consuming when there might not be a need to, particularly if now we're electing a chairman in July, whether that there's still considered to be a need, because we're not doing it in October with the chairmanship changing straight over. That's all I have to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andy. We've got another hand up, Tim. Can you?
Yeah, so it's Jane.
Jane?
Hi, it's just when I read it, in terms of consideration, I don't know whether you've got any reflections, Richard. It is obviously quite a big job to chair Schools Forum, or indeed to be vice chair, because you've got to be prepared then to chair it. And due consideration for the person potentially being nominated as to what the role involves, and whether they've then got the commitment and the time put aside to take that up, is something that I do think we need to be careful of. What you wouldn't want is someone to be bounced into it with the best of intentions at a meeting and then actually find that the commitment for that was not what they expected. And, I understand the reservations in terms of making it more bureaucratic. So and also the transparency of knowing who else is being nominated. So is the other option potentially that nominations are made at a meeting, but where there are obviously more people put forward, that the actual vote on that could then go to the next meeting? So rather than make a very quick decision, there is the time to explore it properly.
Interesting take, Jane. Yeah, that's a different view that obviously hasn't been forwarded. Tim, have you got any comments around the management of that, or would it work, or would it?
Just my initial reflections on that particular option, Jane, is that we'd be getting back into that issue around then we potentially have, we don't know who's going to be chairing the meeting in terms of the first meeting. We'd be back to the scenario, I guess, what we're trying to avoid with the July election, I think.
But if you had a longer run-in, so you still intend for the person to take up in September, does it really, does it matter if it's got a slightly longer lead into that?
It's just when does that election take place? That's the question I was just asking. The election has to take place, as I understand it, and Mandy, will correct me, but as I understand it, the election has to take place in the public meeting, and currently we've got the public meeting that takes place in July, and then we've got the public meeting, the first meeting that takes place in the autumn term, and we wouldn't have time between the two for the election process. Unless I'm again kind of misunderstanding what you're saying, Jane.
No, just obviously when we made a change of chair recently, then it was something that hadn't taken place for a little while, particularly at the moment with people having online meetings. Knowing who is going to be the chair, if it is contested, I know that, I'm really grateful to people who do want to take it on, because it is a big responsibility. So it's just, the intention is to make sure that where someone's taking it on, that they know what they're getting into, and that everyone at the meeting's got time to consider carefully. If they've got to make a choice, I'm not necessarily in a position, if two people put themselves forward, to know who's best suited to be chaired just by sitting in a meeting with them for a few minutes.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that perspective. I mean, what I would, again, my response is that, I would hope that people who are, I understand what you mean about kind of being banked to be nominated, but I would hope that people wouldn't allow themselves to be nominated unless they were stood the commitment, and B, were willing to take it on, and I think it was Leslie's point for at least a period of 12 months.
Okay, thank you, Jane, for that. I think it's Phil's hands up. I think, Tim.
I'm not quite sure. It's just another head teacher. Sorry.
Right.
Oh, it was me, Claire, first. Claire Evans, sorry.
Okay.
Just following up from Jane's point, I mean, when I read it through, just a similar thought that I had, really. I don't really, I agree with the public forum position of it, actually, and I think that's really important. But it's the feeling of being rushed, I suppose. So from my perspective, I was just thinking of, I can see what you mean about the timing of it, in like being in that meeting. And I've not been in a meeting where the chair has been nominated and elected, so I'm not quite sure how it works. But I suppose from my perspective, if it is going to be in that meeting, it would be good to know that there was sufficient time within that meeting to really put aside for it. And perhaps, like you said, Tim, I believe if you're going to be nominated, people have had conversations with you before that, so you kind of know that you're going to receive a nomination, hopefully, and you're prepared for that. Would it be possible to hear almost a verbal pen portrait from people at that point, and give some proper time to it, at least in that meeting? Because, I mean, Jane's right, you don't know people necessarily, particularly if you're new to the forum understanding, and you do want to know, it's phenomenal people take up these roles, and you do want to know that it's somebody who does understand. And if it does come to a vote, you want to hear different people's views, and that way everything is happening in that forum. And I suppose really, if you're somebody that is putting yourself forward to be chair of this particular forum, you would have the wherewithal, the confidence to sort of explain why to people at that point at the meeting that why you're being selected. I don't know. It's just I think like Jane is that sort of in between aspect of it, as opposed to one clear aspect than another, really.
Okay, send this. There's Vicky. Sorry, Vicky.
Yeah, I agree with what's just been said. Sorry, was it Claire?
Yeah.
I think as long as you're informed in the meeting and we have the time to consider and also to be able to vote in confidence as well, having had that information, that's the bit that I think would be more helpful than perhaps trying to organise it all ahead of the meeting, which I mean, I hadn't thought about the things that Mandy has brought up at all. For me, it was just knowing that you're able to make an informed vote, and the pen portrait or a verbal summary from the people nominated would be really helpful with that, I think.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. Judy?
Thank you, Richard. I understand all the issues about having this resolved in a public meeting, but it would be helpful if the forum members could be aware in advance as to which members are prepared to put themselves forward as the chair, rather than the way it happened last year, which is no reflection on either Steve or Richard in any way, but we were bounced into something that we had no knowledge of. And I think by having a 7-day period of sharing information would be helpful.
Okay, thank you, Judy. Kevin?
Yeah, just an observation, really. Having been on forum a while, I know that the last meeting in July isn't necessarily always the best attended meeting. That it's a sensible time to do the election. I'm 100% in favour of that. I think having that 7-day period does enable people to actually see who's being put forward and make decisions as to how they prioritise whether they attend or not. And I know we should all attend every meeting, but obviously when you're a head teacher of a school and you're in July and you've got concerts going on, you've got new parents intake meetings, etc., 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 sometimes Schools Forum loses out. It's the same just before Christmas, isn't it? So what we wouldn't want to do is be electing a new chair and vice chair when you've only got half the forum there. And that's it, really. It's just an observation.
Fair point, Kevin. Steve?
Yeah, can I just follow up? I mean, in a sense, it follows up from what Mandy said. It follows up from what Kevin said earlier, actually, as well as his comments just now. I mean, my personal view is that actually knowing whether there is likely to be an election or whether there is going to be an election in advance actually makes it, personally, I think it's a more democratic process. But going back to Kevin's earlier point about when people are elected and the chair, the other situation that could arise is, like, for instance, this year, Mandy said earlier that the papers have gone out for those people whose 2-year term expires in May. So it's quite possible that up to half of the members who were elected might be new after May. I mean, I hope many of the people who are up for election will stand again and will be re-elected, but it's possible that a significant number of members will be new to Forum for the July meeting. That would be their first meeting. And if the first thing that they're confronted with, almost literally the first thing on the agenda, is to vote for a new chair and vice chair for 2 years, when they're not familiar, in many cases they won't be familiar with the people who are standing for election, I personally think that's another argument in favour of making sure that people know in advance of the meeting. It gives them a chance, if it is their first meeting particularly, to do a bit of research, for instance. So that's my view.
Okay, Tim's going to come in a second. I'm just going to, again, go back out to the floor before I bring Tim in, and I try and summarise before we decide what and how we're going to vote. So is anybody else with any further comments to add to what's already been said from members? Okay, Tim?
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Steve. My concern is that what happens is that if there's only one nomination prior to the meeting, then there is no election. And so that nomination didn't take place in the meeting. So when you say that they're faced with an election, they're not faced with an election because there's nobody to elect. And whether they agree with the pen portrait or not, and whether they believe that that's the right person to chair that meeting or not, then that election doesn't take place. And that's the bit for me that kind of, I think, coming back to Mandy's point about transparency, that people, until that information is emailed out to everybody, everything else is secret. And so you do not see who's nominated. You do not, in a public position, you do not hear that person's been nominated because you don't know. And for me, that's the bit about that election and that nomination for me in a public meeting. And that's why I would be kind of proposing option B as opposed to option A, just be faced with that position.
Okay, so I think the questions are around the timing of it, July as opposed to September. Kevin made a very good point that it is a difficult time for members, sports day and all the things, transition that is going off, and it wouldn't seem appropriate that, we haven't got, we want as many members in that meeting as possible, don't we, to vote for the chair. So that's something I think we need to consider. And then obviously the process. Now, there's been two models suggested by Tim. Either one of those models could be slightly tweaked. I think the bottom line is that this process, whether it's an election between people or it's just one nominee, has to take place in the public meeting. So that's a non-negotiable. Could it be? And I'm going to be totally transparent with myself as the current chair. I've got no bias towards either of these processes. It doesn't bother me one slight bit. Either one would suit me. Could it be, for example, that if it was going to be B, which is the way that it takes place at the moment, that there is some time set aside in that meeting for people to provide a verbal pen profile of why they are an acceptable and a person that is up to the job? Could that be an add-on? Would that work? Would that be a compromise? For me, that would seem a fairly sensible way forward, and people could make a judgment in that meeting to the qualities and the characteristics of the person who's been putting themselves forward. So again, we could be here till Christmas on this one, but I'm going to throw it back out to whether people would consider that to be a reasonable amendment, or whether we just go on what Tim has already suggested. Anybody with any firm, strong feelings around this? Tim, I can't see who that is, sorry.
So that's Vicky again.
Hi, Vicky.
Me again. I think that's a good way forward, Richard. It's kind of a combination of the two, really. Seems sensible.
Judy?
Thank you. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I just feel that having the information earlier will take time away. Well, it will be better use of time because we don't have to take meeting time up with it if we've got some information in beforehand. But if anybody wants to come forward at the whichever meeting we're deciding on, the October meeting, then they've got to be considered as well. But the idea of having this information earlier gives everybody some chance to digest it.
Okay, Judy, thank you. Steve, back to you.
I'm just thinking, if we're going to go for an amendment along those lines, would there be any objection to when the papers go out, and this happens, I'm not talking about county council practices, but it happens in other organisations, to indicate whether the serving chairman is going to stand again? Would there be any objection to that going out in advance of the meeting?
Not from my point of view, Steve. I've got no issue with declaring whether, if I was prepared to continue with the role or not. Not an issue at all, no problem. Okay, I'm just wondering, just as a further point on this, and forgive me if I've got this wrong, just to try to find a solution. Would it be an idea, Tim, for example, if we go with with B, but with the fact that we provide some more time at that meeting for people to present themselves, could it be a further idea to take it to another level, where those people who are going to throw their cap in the ring could provide a pen profile in advance of that meeting that could go out with the papers so people could see that before the meeting? Would that be an extra level of robustness, or is that going to cause some kind of bureaucratic difficulty?
I guess for us, it's understanding is that if you didn't, could you not be nominated in the meeting? I guess that's the bit for me about the point of clarity. So if you wanted to put your hat into the ring, that's fine, and publish that before. Yeah. But what I would want is clarity around, but you don't have to do it until the meeting.
Yeah, but that would be a reasonable compromise. If people were serious around the role and they wanted to try and secure as many votes as possible, surely they would be prepared to send out their pen profile in advance. But that doesn't stop somebody who has a late decision to be able to throw their cap in the ring, but they must then justify their qualities and qualifications to do that role, and probably more importantly, their time to be able to commit to it. Okay, so
I think Mandy's just got a hand up, sorry.
Mandy?
Thank you, Chair. Just a little bit concerned that you're writing things into the Constitution that maybe you don't really need to. I mean, if you want to stand as chair, there's nothing to stop you sending something out as an email to all of the group beforehand. Yeah. But to write it into the Constitution and then allow nominations afterwards, I just wonder whether we're making it a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. I think that the option B with a verbal presentation, when we come to the election process, is quite a good idea, and people would know about that in advance. So if they wanted to send an email out in advance, that would be up to the individual, but it wouldn't stop you doing a presentation at the meeting. I just worry that we're making the Constitution a little bit too restricting or too complicated when it doesn't really need to be.
Thanks, Mandy. Steve?
Yeah, I just wonder if Tim's got any comment on my last suggestion that members know in advance if the chair is going to stand for re-election, because the more I think about it, and I'm just thinking, as I sit here, if you're happy with the chair, and the chair is going to stand again, then fine. But if you know that the chair isn't going to stand again, then people might well put themselves forward who wouldn't do it if they know a chairman who's doing a good job is prepared to do another 2 years. So is there any objection, Tim? Richard said he's happy with it as the current chair. Is there any objection you can think of to with the papers saying item 2 or whatever, election of chair and vice chair, current people are in post and are prepared to stand again or are not going to stand again? Is there any objection to that? Because I think that, that we're getting towards a compromise that would keep almost everyone happy.
To be fair, Steve, yeah, and I'm going to admit I've not kind of been listening for the last couple of minutes because I've been thinking about whether that is something that, and I can't, at this point in time, I cannot think about a reason why that shouldn't happen. The only bit, to some extent, is that, as you've indicated, it still would be for other people to make a decision around whether they were going to nominate themselves or not. That should not dissuade other people from making that decision, should it? Just because the chair saying, yes, I'm happy to stand for another 2 years, it doesn't mean that should stop somebody from nominating. I don't think he's saying that. I think what he's saying is people bear that knowledge that the chair will be standing again.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to draw this together now, which will be here till Christmas, I think. So the first thing I'm going to suggest is on that there's an amendment to item B, where there's an expectation that anybody who is throwing their cap into the ring will be prepared to do a verbal pen profile on the October meeting when we've got hopefully more members are going to be there. So first of all, is everybody accepting that we make that amendment to suggestion B, or is there anybody out there who feels very strongly that would be inappropriate?
I'd just like to see it in writing, Richard. I think I'm okay with the principle, but it's not clear to me at the moment.
Okay, well, Mandy, is that going to cause any constitutional issue about having that in writing?
Can I just clarify, because I'm a little bit confused now. So we're having an election in July, but we're not. We've just agreed that we're doing an election in July. So when are the verbal pen portraits? I thought we'd still be having the election in July, but that is the day then that you would be doing your verbal pen portrait, and then there'd still be that seamless transition for the meeting in October when the new chairman takes place.
Okay, well, I must be obtuse then, Mandy, I think, because I thought had the cabinet pointed out the fact that attendance at that July meeting might not be as thorough as you would want it to be, then it would be advantageous or more beneficial to have the election in the October. But to be fair,
I thought we'd already agreed.
I don't give a. I'm really not that bothered when you do the election. Okay, so well, do we want to put it out to members of whether the July or the October would be the beneficial time to do this election? Now, as the current chair who took over from Steve, you know, there was no transition for myself, and I don't feel it's that onerous a job. It's just a time commitment, because I think you have your pre-brief with the local authority. You're well supported. So, for example, if there was to be another chair in October and there's an expectation for me to help smooth that transition, I don't really know what I would be doing with the new chair, except perhaps having the courtesy to phone them up and say congratulations and is there any questions you'd like to ask? It's not a massive piece of work. So I think can we before we all leave the will to live, can we decide on whether we're going to have this vote in July or whether we're going to have it traditionally as we do in October? So are you happy, Tim and Mandy, that we put that first option to the vote?
Yeah.
Okay, Mandy, can you suggest a way that's going to make sure that this is done efficiently and effectively? The vote, please.
We can either do a named vote, or we can just do a show of hands, and I'll top them up on the screen and read out the numbers, if that's okay. And I can say either July, and then you can vote for July or October. If that's probably the easiest.
So everyone's got to put their hands up before they speak, as you would expect. Okay, so those people who feel it would be most advantageous to have the vote in July, would you please put your hands up?
Sorry, Chair, I'm just checking. Can everybody do it with the little yellow hand? And I can see Judy, but I can't see everybody on the screen, you see. So I don't want to miss anybody. So if everybody could use the little yellow hand, please.
I'm just wondering why Kevin's got his hand up, who was the one who suggested July wasn't the right time, but...
No, I didn't say it wasn't the right time, Richard. I just said we need to consider that.
Okay, right. Okay, have we got a count?
I'm just counting 11. It's actually really hard to count and scroll down at the same time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Sorry, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20.
Carried.
Is that carried?
Yeah, I think it's unanimous, actually. Yes. Oh no, it isn't unanimous. No, but it's
Remind me to put something in your
22.
coffee, Kevin.
Pardon, Richard?
Remind me to put something in your coffee next time I see you.
You normally do.
Okay, so that's got over that hurdle. So the second part of this motion is suggestion A or suggestion B, but with the add-on and suggestion B that the person who is either nominated themselves or have been nominated provides a verbal pen profile at the meeting in July. So,
Richard, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I know it's the third time I've said this, but it might well influence the way I vote, whether we know in advance whether the current chairman is going to stand and vice chair are going to stand or not.
But I think we've already decided that will be declared, Steve, haven't we?
Sorry, yeah. That was the impression I got, but you didn't actually say it when you said with the amendment, and you didn't actually mention that. I just wanted to clarify that.
Steve, yeah, that's clarified that there would be an undertaking that the current chair would declare his intentions or her intentions of whether they were prepared to stay on in office. Yeah. Okay. So let's do it in alphabetical order then. So members, please, who prefer option A, if you could raise your hands. Mandy, have you got a view of the piece?
Again, I can see Judy's hand was raised, and Les, yes. Sorry, I think there were two speakers who'd indicated that they wanted to speak before you took the vote. So I think that's 2 for option A.
Right. Let's just get clarity on this then. Final chance for anybody to have their say before we do this, before we go to vote, please. Anybody who wants voice? Okay, so again, those people who would prefer option A, could you please raise your hands?
It's 1 for option A. Oh, 2 for option A.
Okay, so just for the sake of clarity, those people who prefer option B with those suggested amendments, could you raise your hands, please? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. That's definitely carried.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, everybody. We got there in the end. Tim, back over to you. Have you?
That's completed my part on the Constitution. We will update the Constitution. We'll make the amendments around the option B. We will also make the amendment around the chair indicating their intention, and we will also make sure that we do amend that Appendix 2, Steve. Appendix B, I think it is.
Okay.
Richard, before we move on, can I just for the record, can I express my thanks and appreciation to people who've been involved in this, because it was parked. Obviously, it was parked for a long time because of COVID. But I mean, Richard, you've been involved in it. Mandy has. Bradbury, I think, from the authority, but particularly Tim, who's putting an awful lot to this. And I just would like to put on record my thanks for picking it up, as I was the one who first started poking a stick into the hornet's nest about it a couple of years ago. So thank you.
Can I also, Steve, while you mentioned that, just point out that there's nobody more than yourself who's put the effort in. I put very little effort in, if I'm being honest with you, but I've been party to the emails. And fair play to yourself, Steve. You have spent a lot of time on the detail, and I'm sure that Tim will reflect what I've just said. So thank you, Steve. Judy, your hand went up and down. I don't know if it was a legacy or whether you've got anything to say before we move on.
No, thank you, Richard. I think Kelly's got her hand up there.
Okay, sorry, Kelly.
Sorry, I forgot to put it down. Sorry, but it's not a good start, is it? Sorry.
Okay, thanks everybody. Tim, you happy yet to move on?
Yeah, that's me done.
Mandy, are you happy with that to move on?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mandy. Okay, and as if Tim can't escape. Oh no, sorry, it's not Tim. It's item 8, which is the high needs block update. Anthony.
How to follow that?
Anthony.
Okay, moving on as fast as I can. As previously agreed, this is a regular report we bring outlining the latest position on the high needs block at the request of Schools Forum and given the ongoing pressure in this area. Now, I won't go through the paper in full, as I presume forum members have already had the opportunity to read the paper. But to summarise, the paper outlines the forecast overspend in the high needs block this year, at this time for 2020-21, of £6.5 million. That's slightly, £1 million higher than it was at Q3, and in line with previous historic overspends. That due largely to continuing increased demand within the independent sector provision. A couple of children have come in that are requiring a particularly high level of support and therefore cost since Q3. This certainly means that DSG reserve will be in deficit at the end of the year. That was already expected, anticipated, and Schools Forum in October put in place a deficit management plan, agreeing to use surplus growth fund money to set against the DSG reserve. That will be monitored closely, as we previously outlined, and going forward to see if any further action is required. The paper also goes on to outline the school funding settlement for 2021-22. Pleased to confirm again a very positive settlement next year, with an uplift nationally of £2.2 billion across all the key funding streams within the blocks. The high needs block for Staffordshire next year will be £101 million. On a like-for-like basis, £9 million higher than in the current year. The Council recognises the financial pressures schools across Staffordshire are facing will increase funding to providers by as much as is affordable and fair, acknowledging the current pressures on the high needs block and the depleted DSG balances, deficit DSG balances. So for 2021-22, we have agreed that the special schools budget will be set based on, firstly, a minimum funding guarantee of 1%. That's higher than the MFG set by government of 0 for next year, and will mean that funding for all special schools next year on a like-for-like basis will increase next by a minimum of 1%. And again, as per last year, there will be no capping of school gains, which means that rises above 1% will be retained by those schools. Just want to make it clear that whilst the planned places will continue to be purchased at £10,000 per planned place, in line with the government quoted amount, the MFG of 1% that I've just talked about will be reflected in uplift to the school's specific amount of your matrix funding. And key to that will be sufficient to ensure that schools receive a 1% rise next year overall on their entire budget, including their planned places element. It's not just 1% on the matrix, we put actually a lot more into that element of your funding to make sure you get 1% including your planned places. The report also provides a brief update on other key work programmes, and in particular the High Needs Block workshop, which met again in 9th of February to look at the modelling of future demand in this area and some comparative benchmark information which puts Staffordshire's position against the wider national context. That's available to Appendix B to the report, and whilst I don't want to understate the severity of the financial pressures we're facing, it also demonstrates that we're certainly not alone in this fight. I'd also note that it's interesting to note that the government has this week entered into formal agreements intervening with 5 local authorities with the highest DSG deficits. And you can see some of those authorities to the far right of that chart as Appendix B, who are in a far worse situation than Staffordshire. It also talks about the Education Banding Toolkit work stream, which formally launched on the 23rd of February and with overwhelming enthusiasm and interest. Whilst it's in its early days still, the programme is very tight, and an outline timetable for the programme is set out in the report, ready for a go-live date of February 2022. I am happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Tim, do you want to talk about the High Needs workshop in terms of the notes that you've got now, or do you want to do that after people have had the opportunity to question Anthony?
Yeah, we'll get after Anthony's question.
Okay, yeah, Anthony, so you've got the floor. Obviously, Anthony's just gone through the executive summary there, and there are quite a few pages in the High Needs Block report. Have we got any questions to Anthony? Tim, can you just read off those hands, please? Les?
Hello. I think I've asked this before, but I'm interested in the independent schools aspect. A local authority can actually monitor the impact of funding in the county schools, i.e. mainstream special. How are we evaluating the impact of our spending in the independent special schools, apart from Ofsted going in? How are we chasing the destination to students when they leave, a qualification achieved? Are we monitoring that as a local authority?
Tim, you're probably better to answer that than myself.
So as part of the monitoring of those youngsters, we monitor attendance to ensure that the youngsters are attending. There is also the transition elements to it as well, and so where youngsters are moving on, or where they're moving into a different key stage. So there is that option to look at what's the impact and what difference is it making. I suppose, Les, we do kind of go through an annual review process, and so from that perspective, it is the same really as youngsters in any provision in terms of looking at it. So from that perspective, that we do that kind of monitoring from that particular level. We also, where we've got youngsters who are placed in, where we've got a number of youngsters placed in those settings, again, we continue to kind of review the contract with those settings, and so that we continue to look at what they're providing overall, and as well as you've indicated, the feedback from Ofsted as well, and their inspections.
It's just my point is that this is a lot of money. It's overspending. I think, I don't know about other people on the forum, but I'd be interested in whether there's, I don't know who would do this, I mean, but there's some kind of evaluation of the impact of this its amount to quite, especially as it's overspent and it's independent sector. So it's our money going to independent schools. I just think it'd just be nice to, if it's having a big impact on children's learning and welfare and well-being, and great. If the evidence isn't there, I think we need to think about it, don't we?
Oh yeah,
don't disagree. Don't forget some of the placements there are placements that are either because of parental choice or true as well. So where we're directed to place youngsters in those settings as well. So it's not just a case of the local authority choosing to place those youngsters in those settings. There is a variety of other reasons why we might be placing youngsters there, and potentially there are some sub-settings where we might choose not to place them there, but we're then directed by a tribunal that says, no, you've got to place the youngster in that setting, irrespective of what our views might be.
But it's still our money, isn't it? No matter how they get there,
yeah.
It's still the local authority funding that's doing it.
Yeah. But similarly, we cannot not follow the direction of the tribunal.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. That's fine.
Thank you, Les.
Can I just comment on that, Richard, that point?
You can in a second, Anthony, but Jane was before you. Sorry.
It's just to feedback on a discussion we had yesterday at Secondary Heads Forum, and whether the curriculum offering our maintained special schools and the constraints that they're operating under is then meaning that we're not able to meet the needs of some of our students in the maintained special school sector, and therefore parents do win the case for sending their children to special school. So, there are some particular examples probably, but special school colleagues will have more information than I do about some of our high functioning students who do need special school provision, but that they're not able to meet their curriculum needs necessarily. And has there been any work or analysis done around that as to students that we're then losing to the independent sector?
So in terms of that, Jane, that is some of the work that we're looking at. It's about, okay, so what is it then that we need to provide? And as part of the overall strategy, it is looking at that specialist strategy now, and it's about how do we then meet the needs of some of the youngsters that are being placed in our independent sector, and to support our state-funded schools to meet those needs. And again, one of the things that Anthony referenced is around that, the education banding tool again, making sure that we are providing the right levels of funding to individuals. The work around work with health colleagues around that joint commissioning and looking at that, and so some of the work that a colleague in Kashmiri again is working on are those relationships around joint commissioning. So again, so it's all in train, and it is some work that we are kind of looking at. And again, just picking up on some of the notes from the High Needs Block workshop. It reflects that discussion as well.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Anthony, sorry, now you can come in.
It's okay. It's just to point the fact that whilst independence is over budget, there's not enough money in the pot overall from the government in the High Needs Block. We've got a cash limited pot of £90 million, and it's really divided up between mainstream, specials and independents. But all three actually overspending because we haven't got enough money in the pot, so we tend to split the budget up proportionately to where the spend will be, knowing that all three probably actually going to come in over budget. We could have set the budget with the independent number high enough, with the budget high enough, it would have been on budget, but that would have meant less budget for the specials, and that would just be shown as a bigger overspend. You've just got to look at it as a whole, really. One of the key issues, obviously, is the cost of independence per place compared with other provision is a lot dearer. So to manage this bottom line, one of the key areas of the strategy is to make sure that we develop that capacity at the mainstream and special schools to make sure that the children don't end up in independence by necessity rather than choice.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Tim, can you see his hands up, please? Alison? Alison?
I
think you might be on mute, Alison.
No, I knew I was trying to get it off mute. I would agree with Les, the comment that he made about value for money. And I would just come back to the point that There is very definitely a need, I think, for some independent provision. You know, as a special school head teacher, I know that more than many people, that even in a special school you can't always meet the needs of all of your children, and it's probably more cost effective for those most extreme cases for the student to go to independent provision. But there are very definitely some children in independent provision who don't need to be there, and it's because the local authority loses at tribunal because we're not able to get some of the basics right, and that's because we haven't got the right provision in place that we can call on, and that's for mainstream schools and for special schools. And my concern is that whilst we get this transformation underway and we wait and we consider all of our findings and we do all of our investigations, there are probably tribunals taking place and students being directed to independent schools, which means that then it's not just 1 year that we're paying for independent provision for. Once a child gets into independent provision, it's very, very, very difficult to get them out again. And therefore I would make a call that we need to have more funding in place now to fund things like EP provision and speech and language in the schools, so that we've got them at the point of need, so that we start to turn this tide around, because we simply cannot wait for those things to be in place. And they're the reasons very often that we lose at tribunal, or anecdotally we think that that is the case. And it would be good, Tim, if you could confirm whether there is a research project taking place to look at all of the reasons why we are losing at tribunal, because that needs to be one of our starting points. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Vicky?
Yeah, agreeing with Alison and Les really, and just pointing out the knock-on effect of the children being placed in the independent schools on transport, just picking up from that middle paragraph on page 42. And then also, you know, would it be fair to say that the independent schools charge what it costs, and the mainstream and the special schools get what they get, and they either can meet the need out of that or they can't. So it's almost catch-22 really.
It is, very much so.
Just picking up on the point about, transport, Vicky, that's transport for any youngster that we place in any kind of specialist provision, because of the if they need the transport, they need the transport, but it's not just the independent sector for transport.
Yeah, no, I get that, Tim. I'm not disagreeing that those children need that transport. Just a good job it's not funded out of the high needs block.
Indeed.
Tim, is there any more? Alan Harding?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just interested really to know what proportion of the additional £1 million overspend has actually been allocated to the independent schools, because I mean a 20% increase on the original forecast deficit in just over 2 months is a really phenomenal increase in spending. So it's just really about the proportion of money within that was additional independent school provision and down to tribunals. And then similarly, in terms of the HCP backlog that was raised within that item, and later on in the notice it says it's now been cleared. It was just really so I've got a sense of how that sort of broke down really.
Okay, so it's the overall forecast moved up by £1 million. Obviously, that's on the scale of £90 million spend, so it's gone up by about 1% since Q3 when we last reported. Part of the problem we've had this year on forecasting is the backlog itself, because we've been trying to preempt the cost of that backlog and how many, and we didn't really know who there were or what the needs would be or where they'd be. So we've been playing catch up all year on our forecasting and kind of second guessing what that cost would be. And I think some of this £1 million will be to do with the residual bits of the backlog where we've dealt with them, and the EHC costs are still feeding through into the system. That said, the £1 million increase is all in the independent sector. the forecasting mainstream and the forecasting specials remain exactly as we were previously, but you'll see in a chart at page, let me go to it. Pages on. You'll see the movement from Q3 in a chart. I'll find the page. Okay. Yeah.
I think it's page 42.
At top of page 42. At Q3, I was expecting probably to be about 380 children in independence by the end of the year. I'm probably thinking now that's going to be over 400. And that extra 20-odd children that's come in is about £1 million. We've got a couple of children in there that on an annual level are nearly £250,000 a year. The norm is about 50,000 a year, but we've had a couple of children that are particularly high needs and therefore high cost impact as well. And those kind of things are very hard to forecast. But when you're looking at that level of volatility in cost, a £1 million shift can arise very quickly and very easily.
Okay, thanks, Anne. Les, is your hand still
Yes.
up?
Yes, please. I know there are some students not in any school at all. They're receiving coaching at home, either full or part-time, through private providers. Have you got any notion of how many children students that are doing that, and how much that is costing? And also a second query. I'm talking from personal experience here, so I do know these people. Independent schools, the child couldn't cope. They couldn't cope with the child. That child is now receiving home tutoring. I don't know. This might not be your area. I don't know what follow-up is made when independent school excludes one of our children. I don't know what happens about that. Who goes and checks that, if anybody? I'm interested though in how many students there are not in any school, and how much the tutoring program is costing.
Yeah, Les, we do have those numbers, and Leslie, I think it's online, and Leslie would be able to give us.
Yeah, I have. I just messaged you actually. Yeah, we've currently got about 80 children that are accessing alternative education funded through the local authority in the high needs block. But that's a range of children, some who don't have a school, but some who are in school, but due to medical conditions are out of school for over the 15 days where the local authority step in and put some support in. But that could be a mix of tuition, or we utilise our new AV1 bots that is a new thing that we brought in just over a year ago to, in effect, to both save money on putting a private tutor in, but actually has a good benefit for children to remain connected with their home school. So at the moment, I think the budget off the top of my head is about £1 million we spend on alternative provision, but you'll see we have actually slightly underspent that budget this year, and that's partly because of COVID, where some children coming through have actually been able to access the online offer that schools have provided, so we've not necessarily had to put tuition in for all children, and obviously we've had quite a dramatic reduction in permanent exclusions, so again, for some children we haven't had to put tuition in the primary area where we don't have necessarily PRUs for them to be placed in.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Les. Tim, could you help me out?
David, so it's Dave.
David?
Hi, yeah, just a question there. It's my first time in forum, so I might be wrong in saying this, but in terms of that cost for tuition, is the National Tutoring Programme used for that, or is that something that can be used by the school to support that spend, or is it not? If a child's allocated to a school but can't attend because of medical reasons, because it's subsidised, isn't it, by 75%? I was wondering if that was something that can be accessed, or is that not the case?
Do you want me to pick that up? Because I actually just put that out into the e-bag for schools to just remind them, because one of the tuition services that we have approved provider, Targeted Services, are actually can provide that. They're on that tutoring service, but it is only a maximum of 15 hours for a child and 2 hours a week only. So I don't think it really replaces what we're doing, but I certainly think schools should utilise it for their children, because it can do after school tuition and Easter holidays and things like that. But it is only to a maximum of 15 hours per child. but it was in the school bag on Friday, just gone.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Just before I ask Tim to pick up the notes of the high needs block workshop that I've asked him to do, I think you'll find when Tim does read you these notes, the workshop's picked up many of the themes that you've talked about. But I just want to make it clear, and I've asked Tim also to make it clear, that this group has no strategic powers. You know, we haven't got a magic wand. We under the Constitution of Schools Forum, all we can do is challenge and make representations to the local authority. So I'm just conscious of the fact that my life is around outcomes and making a difference. And this isn't a group that has those powers to do so, except to make recommendations to the local authority. Thank you, Tim. Could you just feedback on that?
So in terms of the high needs block workshop, so we met again in February, and again I think the comments that people are making today kind of cover the comments and the discussions that we've had in the meeting. So again, we kind of looked at the breakdown of the spend around the spend on youngsters with education, health and care plans, and we looked at that compared with what's happening in terms of the the F40 responses in terms of the SEND survey. Again, we also then went on to look at and to have those discussions again around the needs of our youngsters versus the offer that's provided by our special schools, and picking up on Alison's point that to some extent it's about that additionality that the independent sector appear to offer compared with the curriculum offer in our own state funded schools, in terms of they're either local authority maintained or academies, and I suppose that point about, and Anthony's picked it up again in terms of, have we still got the right amount of funding to support the level of youngsters with special educational needs and disabilities in Staffordshire. So we picked up on that, and then if we kind of looked at some of that modelling and the discussions really around that work around social, emotional, mental health, and particularly those youngsters who are high functioning autistic spectrum conditions that have those particular needs. So we discussed that, and that issue around the work that we're doing in terms of the SEND transformation, recognising that's some of the work that we're doing in order to support our mainstream schools in supporting youngsters sooner, so that they get the support that they deserve, rather than escalating through a system, and supporting them to educate the youngsters in the mainstream sector, but also recognising that deals with the if we think about that the spectrum and the continuum towards the lower end, but actually what we've also got is that challenge towards the higher end, and it's about how do we create some capacity and a discussion around the generic element of some of our special schools versus the expectations, I guess, in terms of some of the specific needs of some youngsters. And so again, had that discussion around how do we move to something where we can actually remodel that specialist offer in order to then be able to provide some of that specialist need, as opposed to some of those generic challenges. And so what we've talked about, and we will be looking at the next meeting, is some of that breakdown of youngsters by primary need, and again, just to I guess support that discussion around where are we moving with that specialist provision in Staffordshire. And just picking up on Richard's point, really, again, the work of this group is around the finance element of it, and Schools Forum is around funding, and it's about making sure that what we're not doing is we're not duplicating the work of other groups, and so that is something that we need to continue, and so. As I say, we'll be looking at the requests that are coming in, where they're coming from, what age groups, as well as the breakdown of those needs at the next meeting, as well as that kind of comparison with what's happening at a national picture as well. So that's kind of a summary of the discussions of the high needs workshop that we had back in February, and as I say, we've got some actions for the next meeting.
Okay, thanks, Tim. That was a hell of a lot to take in there in that short report. Are there any other questions from members, either to Anthony or to Tim around the high needs block? Okay, Anthony, are you happy? Have you finished?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Anthony.
No problem. Steve, put your hand up.
Can I just come in again? Sorry, I should have put my hand up earlier. Just on the education banding toolkit, just again to put on record how well Leslie's presentation went down, both at the launch and when she gave up time to come to LMSCC, and we wish her well. It all sounds promising, and we'll see how it plans out. But just wanted to say thank you for Leslie, and I'll say it really did go down very well.
Oh, thanks, Steve. Appreciate that.
Hand up, Leslie.
Sorry.
Tim.
Yeah, and I suppose that yes, and we kind of thank Leslie for that. I think it's just that reminder again to Schools Forum. And to all colleagues really, is that the education banding tool is a way in which we slice a pie up. And so what I'll be, again, just reminding everybody is that pie, it's not about saving money. It's not efficiency in terms of we're not looking to make any cuts there. But what we will be saying is that pie is the pie. And it's a way in which we then slice that pie up through that education banding tool. And so what we have to recognise is that if we're going to slice it up in different ways, then that means that some schools may receive additional funding, but then that also therefore means if we're not increasing the pie, that some schools therefore are going to lose funding for their particular youngsters and the particular needs. And so again, I just need to put that on kind of record as well, so that everybody realises that is the impact of doing it. What and I know Leslie will be working on is around how we provide some protections over a period of time, but we do have to recognise the reality is that's what the banding tool will ultimately lead to, and so we all need to be clear that's what that piece of work will lead to.
Yeah, Tim, and I'd like to reinforce that, having been through this with Leslie 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even longer, Leslie, that there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers. Okay, thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Leslie. If we can move now on to item 9, which is the school's budget update, and I think that's you, Will.
Yes, thanks, Richard. I won't spend long talking about this because it's just basically a summary of what's already been agreed at the October report and basically what's been reported in to Schools Forum in January. Plus all the school budgets are now out and all the budget packs are on the SLN, so all the maintained schools have had that. And hopefully the early years providers will be having, should have got their settlements earlier in the week, or if not, it'll be by the end of this week, beginning of next. In summary, then, the central provisions, there's as agreed in October, there are only 2 changes really. In the historical commitments for combined services, early help was agreed to be delegated to schools. So that money is now being delegated in the schools block. And that service will no longer be funded by the central block of DSG. And the second change is on the de-delegation, where the insurance was still to be de-delegated, but using the RPA rather than the commercial arrangement that the county used to buy into. Just confirmation of the education functions charge, which is for all maintained schools. October it was thought to be £55.68, but it's actually worked out at £55.71, so just a very minor increase. The aim with the growth fund allocation was to, in the first instance, if there was any need to fund the NFF, that we would use for growth fund allocations for that, and everything else would be retained either for growth fund purposes or in line with the deficit recovery plan. So we have been able to fund the NFF in full, and the growth fund stands at £2 million. On to the individual schools budgets. The minimum per funding levels have increased in 21-22 for primaries, Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. And the big news really is the MFG. We've been able to afford for maximum permissible by government of 2%. So we've given everybody 2%, and we haven't capped any budgets in doing so. Teachers' pay and pension grants, which have been received as separate grants in the past, have now been rolled into the allocation. Early years, there's been a 6p increase to the 3 and 4 year olds and an 8p increase in 2 year olds nationally to our allocation. That's been passed directly into the base rate. So it takes the base rate to £4.10 per hour for 3 and 4 year olds and £5.26 per hour for 2 year olds. Last year in January 2020, we had a workshop in regards to looking at the funding rate for 2021 and some principles going forwards. And these were around the contingency and the deprivation rate. The groups decided that a contingency was needed and 1% should be sufficient. But if that contingency was underspent, then in the following year it'd be redistributed. So 1920s was underspent, so we're in the process of redistributing that now. But we've kept to those parameters and set them for 21-22 budget. So the 2% of the budget is for deprivation, and the contingency we've actually lowered to overall to 0.75%. So that's 0.7% of 3 and 4 year old funding and 1.9% for 2 year old funding. High needs, Ant has covered most of the points, so I'll just be very quick with that. We've had additional government funding of 11.6 million in 21-22, and for special school budgets have been set to provide for a minimum funding guarantee of 1% and no capping of gains. And there's been no funding requests this year for the 0.5% from the schools block into high needs, just because of the allocation from government. And that's it for me, if there's any questions.
Okay, members, have anybody got any questions for Will, please? Tim, can you?
Yeah,
Philip?
Yes, thanks, Richard. Just to say, really, just a report back from the market recovery group that the PVI settings have. It was very much appreciated that the increases were passed straight through into the base rate, and also that especially that the contingency is going to be redistributed again as it was last year. All this in the current climate that we're in is very helpful, and would also want to have it on record that the additional funding, which we know was government funding, but to help where we've had to have room closures because there've been quite a number of room closures, that's all been very helpful. So just to say thank you really for all of that.
Thank you, Philip.
Thank you, Philip. So that's great. Thank you. Okay, before we move on to the last item, are there any other questions that members would like to ask Will around the budget update? Crikey, Will, you've got off very lightly there with a compliment. You've done very well.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Item 10, which is the work programme and the date of the next meeting. Mandy, do you want to just very quickly go through the works programme for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've slotted in some dates just to mirror previous years, really. And I've been in discussions with officers to try and populate the work programme, so you know you've got a rough idea of what will come to each meeting. I'll obviously move the appointment of chair and vice chair around a little bit now to reflect the changes you made earlier. And I've also introduced right at the end items that you've raised in the past that are just pending, waiting for an update, just so that you can keep an eye on things and you know you don't forget that you've raised questions in the past, which I think was suggested at the last meeting.
Yeah. Thank you, Mandy. Steve?
Yeah, I just wanted, as I was the one who brought it up at the last meeting and perhaps pointed out that the work programme had fallen into a little bit of a black hole with Mandy having to take over from Julie. I just wanted to say thank you very much and express my appreciation that it has been picked up so effectively, and I think it's really useful now. So thanks very much, Mandy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mandy. Okay, before I close the meeting, has anybody got anything else that they want to bring to the attention of the Schools Forum? Okay, thank you. Can I take this opportunity for thanking everybody for their commitment and for taking the time in very difficult and busy times this afternoon. And those of you who are travelling back, a safe journey, and those of you that are at home, put the kettle on. So thank you very much, and we'll see you at the next meeting, which is presumably, Mandy, when's the next meeting? The 15th of July. The 15th of July. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cheers all.